Hi, now I'm going to try and answer a question that always comes back to me. Everyone asks this question, well not everyone obviously, but and it's, how do I become a photographer? Well, that's a bit like asking, how do I become a sportsman? There are so many different types of photography, and now I'll try and demonstrate it. There's aerial photography, animal photography, concert, stock photography, architectural, portrait, weddings, glamour, sports, travel, underwater photographer. I don't fancy that at all. Advertising, that was my speciality. Fashion photography, photojournalism, documentary, war, don't fancy that either. Paparazzi, event, scientific, forensic. Now forensic is not done like you see on television. They are proper qualified photographers. There's theatrical photographers. There's even the photographers that take pictures of stills during a film, and they're making a film. That sounds like good fun. Industrial, people photographers, car, panoramic and landscape photographers. Now all those are specialities. Now you can't do them all. People think, oh, I'm a photographer, I can do anything. Well, they can't. The amount of equipment you would need to own would be impossible. You would A, need a house to keep it in, B, you can never afford it. You would never be able to earn enough money to buy all that equipment. From 600mm lenses, 1200mm lenses for the paparazzi, down to wide angle lenses, etc. for landscape. Underwater equipment, there's no way. You can't specialise in it. You can't do everything, you have to specialise. There's an old expression, jack of all trades, master of none, and that's exactly what would happen if you tried to do all those. Now what do you need to be a photographer? Well, what you need is knowledge. You have to know about the business, and you have to know running a business, and you have to know how your equipment works and how to use it. You need an awful lot of luck, that is for sure. You need a lot of luck. I've been very lucky in my life, and of course you need equipment. But let's go on to that later. Now this lesson is going to be aimed at the young photographer, the youngster who wants to start out. I'll do another lesson for the older photographer who wants to change into photography, because the problems are totally different. If you've lost your job, or just you're not happy in your job and you want to change, the problems are totally different to a youngster who can take risks, etc. in finding his way to be a photographer. So I'll continue this lesson for the youngster. So let's think about a young photographer called Fred. Now Fred has got himself a nice little bridge camera. He knows that when he puts it on automatic it goes very nicely, and he can play around with it a bit on manual. Everyone who looks at his pictures, particularly his mum and dad, say, oh, those are great, you should be a photographer. Well, I can only liken that to parents who've just had a baby, and their baby is the most beautiful that's ever been born. You have to be realistic about things. Will a photographer say that your photographs are great and you should be a photographer? So there's a lot more to think about and a lot of things to be careful about. I said one of the things, the most important things to have is knowledge. Now one of the big questions is, do I have to go to school, photographic school, to be a photographer? Well, the proof is in front of you. No, you don't. I've got no qualifications in photography at all. Although I was a photographer since about 1968, so I've done alright. The biggest thing is that knowledge you have to get from somewhere. Now you've got two choices. I started taking pictures when I was 8 years old. By the time I was 16, when I left school, I had quite a good knowledge on photography. If I'd have gone to photography school, I would have probably lost 2 years, because it would have taken 2 years for them to get to the standard that I was at already. So I didn't see any need to go to photographic school, Do I regret it now? I regret it for the social life that probably I would have had. But on the other hand, I was a fully fledged photographer by the time I was 19, working for quite good clients. So I gained a few years. So that's the education, but you must know everything technically about photography. And the best way of learning that is by working for another photographer. Now I can hear you say, oh, I don't need to do that. But let me just point out one thing. Reputation, a good reputation is very hard to get, but it's very easy to lose. Now if you don't know everything technically about photography, one day for a paying client you'll get caught out. You'll be in a situation, because of your lack of knowledge, you won't be able to get yourself out of trouble. Believe me, I've seen it happen. So let's take it that Fred has been taking photographs as a hobby for a period, let's say 2 or 3 years, and he's doing nice prints and he's very happy with his work. Now, what's the next step for Fred? Well, he's got his little bit of knowledge, not enough. Go and work for a photographer. Now, when I was still at school, I went down to my local wedding photographer and portrait photographer and asked him if I could help him doing his prints, mounting the photographs, and eventually, of course, I was there helping him carry his bags at weddings. Now, that is knowledge that is so important. You actually see day to day operating a photographer at his business, answering the phone, how he talks to clients, how much to charge. All this is invaluable knowledge. Now we know that Fred's got this incredible knowledge. He's leaving school. He's been working for a photographer. What's the next step? Well, I think now is to try and find a direction with his photography. Does he want to be a wedding photographer all his life, or a portrait photographer all his life? Nothing wrong with it. But what he's got to bear in mind, that if he gets to a point where he's got married and got children, bought a house, he can no longer change direction. He can't take that risk to specialise in underwater photography or something like that. So he has to now, when he's young, try and find the right direction. He might have 2 or 3 tries. I used to work for a food photographer. I then worked for a car photographer. I then even worked for the Royal Portrait photographer at that time. So I tried lots of little specialities before I found my way in and what I really wanted to do and what I was passionate about. The strange thing is, I ended up as a car photographer. Now I would shoot cars in the studio and out the studio for advertising, very few brochures. I did a few, but mostly advertising, big street posters and things. Now, my passion was cars, and I ended up as a car photographer. So you see, passion rather does guide your life. Now, people say I was very lucky. I was, but I worked very hard. I knew my subject inside out. I knew cars inside out, and I knew photography inside out. So is it luck? Probably, but I worked for it. So let's get back to Fred. His major problem now is to find a job as an assistant to a great photographer, because that's the only way he's going to be a great photographer. He manages to track down the best, and let's say a fashion photographer, and he wants to work for the best fashion photographer. How do you do that? If you write them a letter, you won't even get a reply. I used to get so many letters, it was impossible. Excuse me. So we had too many letters, couldn't possibly reply. Now, I would arrange to somehow meet the person I wanted to work with. Knock at his door, his secretary, if he answered, fine. If not, it was his secretary. Could I talk to Norman, or could I talk to Tony? I'd normally get the big no, but I would insist a bit, and sometimes I could get them. If not, I would wait outside the studio and see where they went for lunch. Anything. If you're that keen on working for them, you'll get to meet them. And you might only end up washing their floor, cleaning their car, but it's a way in. And from that point on, If you are washing their floor in their studio, you'll answer the phone, you'll talk nicely to a client, you'll impress everybody, you'll end up as his assistant. It always happens. Now Fred's been working for a fashion photographer for a year, and he's got a lot of experience now. He's been an assistant for a year, and that's pretty good. He's learnt so much how to talk to models, how to talk to stylists, how to talk to photographers. Now, he's now decided he doesn't like fashion, or he likes taking the pictures, but doesn't like the people involved. So he's met a lot of assistants over the year, and some of them work for still life photographers, some of them work for food photographers, etc. So any type of photography. And he's decided he wants to change. Now, has he lost a year? No, he certainly hasn't. He's built up a list of stylists, a list of models, a list of photographers, because they've all got friends. He's had a social life in the business. He's got lots of new telephone numbers of clients, and that is all great stuff to have. Now he goes to work, because he's now an assistant, a real assistant. He can get a job very easily for another photographer, and maybe still life, does a year with still life, maybe a year with a car photographer. After 3 years he should have the total basics of opening his own studio or working for somebody else, but to very high level. Now he can be really in the money by now. Okay, 3 years of earning virtually nothing, living off the lunches paid by the photographer, but now the world is his oyster. Was it worth those 3 years instead of spending 3 years at university? No, I think yes. Anyway, there we go. That's my view of being a photographer and how to become a photographer. If not, you've got the other way. Pick up your camera and just take pictures. Do a print for this person, that print for that person. I don't consider that an exciting life, but you know, it's all for our own, isn't it really? Cheers.